Okay, can you hear me? Or can you hear me? Okay, if you can't hear me anymore, please start waving. Okay. So thank you, Lauren, so much for this really nice introduction. And well, I'm overwhelmed by all these people here. Thank you for coming to my talk. And I would like to thank the search committee here at Texas Tech Biology for inviting me to interview here and to give this talk. And so Lauren already stole my title. What I actually would like to tell you today is how cells can stick to each other and then talk to each other by touching. And we're going to go into some details of that. And then I will tell you about cell stickers and signals and molecular insights into immune cell communication. So hopefully this technology here is going to work. Wonderful. So I want to give you the take-home message right away. So if you're going to start fall asleep at some point, at least you know about what I wanted to tell you. And I hope you don't fall asleep and stay awake until the very end. What I would like to tell you is that a family of cell adhesion molecules, which are called nectins and nectinide molecules, they are like molecular zippers for cells. They form a specific lock and key motif, and I'll show you a lot about this lock and key motif later. And they also can form cis-trans oligomers, which will link two different cells together. And these cis-trans oligomers form receptor clusters that then can signal into a cell. Okay, so these are the points I would like you to keep in mind. Okay, so I told you cells talk to each other by touching. And what do I mean by that? So the touching, of course, is cell adhesion, and the talking to each other is signaling. So here you can see some epithelial cells. And like you see the cell here, you see the cell here. And what you can see here in the middle is the cell adhesion zone, where these two cells adhere to each other, and they can also exchange signals. This is another important cell which needs to exchange signal, which is neurons. Neurons are touching a lot of other nerve cells, and how they exchange signals is they can touch each other and then exchange a signal by that. Another cell, which is very important, are fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are very special types because they can actually move around in the body, right? When you have bone healing, for instance, fibroblasts will move towards them, towards the site. And by moving, they're going to touch a lot of cells during that process. And they don't want to stay there, they want to go further. So they need a signal, okay, I want to go there. And then a special type of cells are, of course, in the immune cell, in the immune system. And immune cells are mobile in the body. They travel in the lymph, they travel in the blood, and they basically can travel anywhere in your body. And they're going to touch a lot of different cells. Basically, every other cell type is touched by immune cells. And of course, the immune cells also have to talk to each other, right? Because the immune system has to mount an immune response. And so this is a dendritic cell, so the little bit freaky looking one here in blue is a dendritic cell. And the other one is a T cell, and they're exchanging information here. And so my question here is, so this is all very biological, and I'm a biophysicist, biochemist, sociobiologist, so the question I can ask here is, how do these subjunctions between those cells form at the molecular level? And for that, I have to introduce you to cell-cell junctions. And cell junctions are formed by cell adhesion molecules. And what you can see here is two cells. And if you have a same cell type attaching to each other, for instance, in the epithelial cell type I just told you about, this is called a homotypic interaction. And now you have cell surface receptors. So this would be the outside of the cell. It's the inside of the cell. They're usually transmembrane domains. And if you have the same cell surface receptor sitting on one cell and another one sitting on the other one, the same one, this is a homotypic interaction. What you can also have is different receptors, right? You have a different receptor here, another one here. If they touch each other, it's called a heterophilic interaction. So what you can, of course, have too, for instance, in the immune system, or the fibroblasts have that, and also in nerve cells, is that you have interaction between two different cell types. So one cell type here, for instance, epithelial cell, So another way, or another thing I wanted to tell you is that if an interaction type is like this, where you have one receptor sitting on one cell and the other receptor sitting on the other cell, then it's called a trans interaction. If you have a receptor sitting on this part of the cell and then another receptor, either the same one or a different one, sitting on the same cell, then it's called a cis interaction. It's very important, trans and cis. And then I told you they're not only touching each other, but they can also signal to each other. So how does that work? Well, so these are our little homophilic or heterophilic interaction. And so these molecules can have intracellular signaling modules. And I depicted them here in the little blue ones and the green one. So there are many different signaling modules, and they can have many different signaling units. But one, for instance, would be phosphorylation. So you have the kinase come in, phosphorylate the whole thing, and then you get a signal inside the cell. So now, I told you about the zippers at the very beginning, so why do I call them zippers? Because so far, I don't think you could see any zippers, right? It's like one molecule from one side, one from the other. Okay, so I'm going to try and prove you that there are zippers. So the model we think this works right now is the following. We have the cell 1 here, cell 2 here. This is the inside, this is the inside, this is the extracellular space, right? We have one receptor coming from one side, another receptor coming from the other side. And now these can interact with each other, and there's proof that they can have something like this. Remember, we have a cis interaction on the same side of the cell. Something like that. And then it can have also a cis dimer coming from the other side, right? Because it's homotidal interaction right now. And then we could form something like this. So we have like a trans interaction going on now. The problem with this route, however, it's very hard to imagine how this forms because we would have to reform this bond or this interaction to form this kind of zipper. So there's another theory or hypothesis out there which looks like that. And so this molecule here could form a cis-trans interaction. You can immediately see what the difference is, right, between those two kind of arrays. And this here could easily form, like, if you just follow this, right, you just have another one of this and then another one of that. So you could have a huge zipper going all the way out onto here, right? So zippering the whole cell adhesion site together. So, so there are several problems here. And then, of course, you can have signaling in that now this kind of zipper, also this here, could then attract kinases, for instance, and then you get a phosphorylation on this intracellular signaling modules. We get phosphorylation, and then this attracts another signaling module, and then you have a signaling cascade going. Because you can imagine if you have like a lot of these molecules zippering together, you get like a massive amount of receptors clustering there, right? So you get thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of molecules clustering here and then attracting other molecules in the cell. So we have scenario 1 and scenario 2. And the problem is with that, it's really hard to figure out the cell biology methods, what's going on here. Because you're probably able to look at this in a microscope. Yes, you will see all these molecules are together. They're probably zippering up, but it's really hard. And structure biology-wise, we have structures of some of these things. And what the structures show us is basically this here. The problem is all the structures are homophilic interactions. So it's the same molecule interacting with the same molecule. And so we're having a really hard time to discern if it's this kind of cis dimer, which would be formed in the same cell, or if we're having this kind of thing. So I apologize, this doesn't look like this, but believe me, so if we have this or this, it will look the same in a crystal structure. But because it's a homophilic interaction, same molecule with each other, it's really, really hard. You can't really say if it's from the same cell or from a different cell. So anybody have an idea what we could do? Remember what I told you, homophilic, heterophilic? No? Structure biologist?
Mix the two.
Mix the two, yeah, exactly. So instead of having a homophilic interaction, if we have two receptors which were sitting on opposite sides of the cell, which are different from the structure, we could discern if we're having this going on or this going on, right? So if we had a heterophilic structure, this could probably help us resolve the mechanism. And this is basically exactly what we did. So now I would like to tell you a little bit about the nectins and the nectin-like molecules. And I apologize for the nomenclature. It's a very long, well-known proteins, and this is why the nomenclature is a little bit off. So these molecules are transmembrane, have transmembrane domains, and they confer transient cell-cell contacts. So very often when you start cells adhering to each other, so these are the first molecules who come in, and then you have like quaternions and integrins and a lot more molecules making this junction tighter. But they are usually the first ones who come in. And so these molecules are widely expressed cell adhesion molecules, basically on all cells of the body. They do regulate a lot of things, and some are cell differentiation, tissue morphogenesis, and intracellular signaling, obviously. And then they also, some of them also regulate neural synapse formation. And some of them regulate immune cell function. And it's also known if some of them are regulated, what you'll have is really bad cancer metastasis because the cell adhesion of the cells is disrupted or is changed, and then you suddenly have cells which are very mobile and can move around, and that will help them to metastasize. So it's a large family of proteins, and these are the nectins, nectin 1 to nectin 4. We have the nectin-like proteins, which are nectin-like 1 to nectin-like 5. And I would like to draw your attention to this one, which is not only called nectin-like 5, but it's also called poliovirus receptor. And that again has historical reasons, but this is actually really the poliovirus receptor which allows poliovirus to enter a cell. And in fact, a lot of these molecules have been found just in the last 5 years to be actually receptors for like measles and a lot of other viruses. So they take advantage of these surface molecules and then shuttle them into the cell to infect the cell. And then there's a special subset of this family, and they are only expressed on immune cells. And I would like to draw your attention to this one here called TIGIT. And just to show you what this family is doing, so this is just exactly the same molecules I just showed you before. And these molecules can not only have homophilic interactions, so these ones here are proven they can form these homotypic interactions, what I just showed you. Same molecule in one cell, the other is the same molecule in the other cell. This is exactly our problem because the structures, right, they're all the same. But they also can interact with each other. And this is not all the interactions, people are just working on it. I predict there's more than that. And these molecules are very conserved, they're very similar to each other, but all a little bit different. And they all have a little bit different binding constants, and it's really, really puzzling how that happens. Like really similar, really conserved molecules, they all interact with each other. You can see that the nectins and the nectin-likes, they promiscuously interact with each other, I would say. And you can also see that this PDR guy here interacts with the TIGIT one. This is what I'm going to talk about later on. So the question now here is, I told you they're all very similar, but they're still very specific and selective. They can't interact with all of them, right? So how do these molecules achieve specificity and selectivity? And also the question is, how do these molecules actually signal into the cell? Because signal they do. And they all have different outcomes from signaling. So to tell you a little bit about TIGIT, TIGIT is a T-cell and NK-cell specific immunoregulatory molecule, and has this really complicated name, T-cell immunoreceptor IgG and I10 domains. And I'm glad they did TIGIT out of it because this is really hard to spell all the time. And a colleague of mine found this, this is a molecule here, so you can see that this would be the extracellular domain, this is the IgG domain, and then you have a transmembrane domain here, so this would be the membrane, and then intracellularly you have a so-called I10 domain, which is one of these signaling molecules I talked to you about, which can be phosphorylated. And so this would be this domain here. And this molecule came out of a large genetic screen maybe some time ago at Genentech, and they basically just took bioinformatics and looked at the human genome and looked at molecules in the immune system which haven't been yet characterized, which just have this item domain. So this is apparently also a way to get a paper. You just do bioinformatics, look for these special domains, and characterize it. And it turned out that this molecule was just expressed on T cells and NK cells. And to show you that, this is from the publication. You can see that, so this is a fact plot, if you're not familiar with that. And the things are on the left, they're not there. The more things are on the right, the more of the molecule is there, basically. So you can see that on naive T cells, you get some expression on memory T cells, it's there. On regulatory T cells, it's really expressed a little bit on NK cells, not a lot, not at all on CD8, not on dendritic cells, and not on B cells. And so now let me introduce you with a poliovirus receptor to you. It has been found that it's a high affinity receptor for TIGIT. And this was also done at Genentech, again in a large screen where we can spot a lot of membrane proteins on an array, and then you just wash your partner over it, and then you look for binding. And this was one of the proteins which came out of that. And it has also an item domain that's C-terminus. That was a surprise. And so what you can see here is it's a little bit larger. This is the extracellular domains. You have an IgG domain again. You have another Ig domain. Here's another one. This would be the membrane domain here. And then you have this intracellular item domain again, which can be phosphorylated and then signal downstream. And PVR is expressed in a completely different subset of cells in the body. And you can see that here it's expressed on dendritic cells. It's not on B cells, not on T cells. Remember, TIGIT was on T cells and NK cells, so this is not expressed at all on any of the cell types. It's expressed on endothelial and epithelial cells and on fibroblasts. And so that means it's mostly everywhere in your body, but not in immune cells apart from dendritic cells. So, so why are we interested now in those two especially, when this is such a large family of proteins, right? My collaborator, Jane Grogan, also found out that if you have TIGIT interacting with PVR on the right cell type, it will dampen the immune response. Anybody has an idea why I would like to dampen an immune response? Why would I do that? Nobody? So usually, right, you want to heighten your immune response to fight viruses and worms and bacteria and cancer and whatnot. So, but in case if you have immune disease, autoimmune disease, right, it's really bad that your immune system is going off. So this is a reason why you would actually really like to dampen your immune response. You don't want to go down to 0 because then you can get any kind of nasty infections. But you want to dampen it to a certain round level. And this is exactly what the system does. And I'm going to tell you how it's going to do that. So for instance, you have TIGIT, and I just told you that it's expressed on regulatory T cells. So this is a T cell. Then TIGIT is naturally expressed in these T cells. Then we have dendritic cells, which are anti-regenerative cells, and very, very important in the immune system. And then you have PVR expressing those cells, which is showed you. And so if these two molecules now interact with each other, we get some signaling on the PVR side. So show this item domain which gets phosphorylated. And if that happens, then we have upregulation of some pathways, and I'm going to tell you about that. It's kind of complicated. And then what we have is IL-10 production. And then the IL-10 will have an effect on effector T cells. And that really dampens your immune response. Again, it doesn't go down to 0, but it will go down way below what it was at that point. So here you have a dampening or attenuating effect. And so now if you look at that, you're probably going to ask, so what's the structural biologist going to do with that? Because this is now a really complicated system, right? 2 different cell types, IL-10, whatnot, really complicated. So the way what biochemists, biophysicists, structural biologists do is they try to take these really complex systems and then take out a minimal unit from that, reconstitute that in vitro, look at it, and then try and see if we can learn anything for the whole system for that. So, and this is exactly what we did here. Right, so I want to learn what is the molecular mechanism for TIGIT-PDR signaling, obviously. So what I do is we take out this little piece here. We just take out the TIGIT and PDR and look at it and see if we can learn anything from this system from it. And so we reconstituted the TIGIT-PDR complex, and just to show you a little bit what we do. So this would be TIGIT, but in this case we didn't clone the whole TIGIT molecule because it has a transmembrane domain, it has a signaling domain. This would be very messy. So what we did is we just took the orange part here, which is the IgV domain. And a similar thing we did for the PDR, because you have all these extra domains. You have the IgV domain, another IgV domain, another one, transmembrane domain. That gets very messy, but then you want to crystallize it. So we just took the first domain, and we could show that those domains are necessary and sufficient to form a complex. So this is enough to restore your whole signaling cascade. And so the TIGIT molecule, we can make in E. coli, and then it will go into so-called inclusion bodies. And you have to purify from that and refold it. The PDR was a little bit more complicated. We do that in a so-called baculovirus expression system, where we use actually cells derived from an insect, which you can then infect with a virus to make your protein. And then you can recombine, reconstitute your complex, just put it together, reconstitute your complex, and then you can crystallize that. And so just to show you, and you don't have to believe me, that these two are really sufficient to show the complex, to make the complex. So this is just the TIGIT IgV domain and PDR IgV domain together. And what we can do is, so this is just a depiction of that. What we can do is a so-called size exclusion chromatogram. I don't know if you're familiar with this technique. So you run it through a column, and then the big things will come first, and then the smaller things will come last. And so what you can see here is this is a TIGIT-PDR complex. It's a really nice single peak, and this here is extra TIGIT we put in. And so this is a SDS gel. What you can see here is the PDR-1 domain and the TIGIT-IDV domain, and this would be these fractions here, and these two running now together on a column means that they're actually really forming a tight complex. And so we went on, and we crystallized TIGIT alone. And what you can see here is that TIGIT crystallizes in really a lot of crystal forms. And these are some of the most prettiest crystal I've really seen in my crystallography career, and I have seen a lot of crystals. And what happened was that actually these ugly guys here had some real inner beauty, and we could solve the structure with those ones. And so to show you the structure, so just to remind you, it's really just the TIGIT right now we're looking at. So the structure looks like that. It's a typical IgV domain fold, and this fold is the following. So we have a beta sandwich structure with a beta strand on the top, beta sandwich on top, beta strand on the back, and then they are linked together by a stem sulfide bridge. And the resolution is 2.6 angstrom, and we have okay statistics. And I would like to draw your attention to this tyrosine 113 here at the bottom, because that's going to be interesting in the later slides. And so we also solved the structure of the complex, of course. So depicted here, the PDR and the TIGIT together. These were not so pretty crystals, but a lot of inner beauty here. And this is the structure. And PDR is obviously also an IgV domain, as I showed you before, so it's very, very similar fold. Remember, beta sandwich on the top, beta on the back. And so the red thing is just a sugar, which comes from the baculovirus system. And what you can see now here is, so I depicted it here, it's a symmetrical dimer, symmetrical heterodimer. PDR is here, TIGIT is here, and so here would be the TIGIT, tyrosine 113 here. And then on the other side, similar residue on PDR would be the phenylalanine 128. And so I would like to keep those two in mind, because this is how we're going to orient ourselves in the structure. So tyrosine 113, phenylalanine 128. And the resolution wasn't as good, but it's still okay. It's 2.9 angstrom with okay statistics. And so here we have it. This is our heterophilic transdimer, right? And it has to be trans because those two molecules are on very different cell types, as I just showed you. They're on a T cell and they're on a dendritic cell. There's no way this can be a cysteiner. They cannot be on the same cell type. Of course, you want to look a little bit more at this interface, right? Because this is what interests us, and you can see if you can learn anything about the specificity and the selectivity of these molecules. So now I just turned the molecule, which you saw before, and now the way we're going to look at it is this way. Okay, so this is going to be the interface with the tyrosine and the phenylalanine right there. And it looks like this. So we have PDR in blue on the left, that's the first part. We have TIGIT on the right in yellow. And so this is the tyrosine 113, and this is now the phenylalanine 128. And what you can see is really symmetrical because these two molecules are very similar and they're aligning head to tail. So it has to be a sort of a symmetrical interface. And the nice thing now is if you actually zoom in into this interaction, what you see is that there's actually a huge pocket here where the phenylalanine 128 points in. So this is PDR and this is TIGIT, and what you can see is TIGIT makes this huge pocket, right, on this side. And because this kind of interaction, lock and key interaction, so the phenylalanine, this kind of things jutting out would be obviously the lock or the key? The key, right? This would be the key, and this would be the lock, right? And then because this is a symmetrical interaction on the other side, we have a similar thing, right? So the tyrosine on TIGIT here in yellow juts in a deep pocket on PDR, on PDR. And so this explains now really nicely the specificity and the selectivity. Because if you don't have the tyrosine here, if the pocket is not completely right, you won't get this interaction, or it will be way less specific, or it will be way less tight. And the things for this pocket here, the pocket is not completely right. And if it's, for instance, a tyrosine, the tyrosine wouldn't fit in here at all because you have an extra OH group. There's no way this can fit in here. So this explains now for all the family of nectins and nectin-like molecules how they're going to interact with each other and why affinities are what they are. So that is very nice. So our structure explains that already. So of course I showed you that these two molecules facilitate the cell adhesion, right? So now we should look at if this trans interaction actually does cell adhesion, because I told you that we now have our hydrophilic interaction and I think this is in trans. But I think I have to prove to you that it's really actually a trans interaction, not something else. So the assay we're doing for that is very simple. We have cells which express either PDR or TIGIT, and then we just dye the cells if we dye. So the cells are alive, they get some membrane dye, a little bit, just enough to see them in the microscope and to be able to fax them. And then we just look at them. So we have cells in red, and we have cells in green. And then we mix them, incubate them, and just look at them if they're clustered. Because it's a cell adhesion molecules, right? So if they're overexpressing these molecules, they should really tightly stick together like mouse. And so the question is now, if we have two TIGITs, so two cell types which are both making TIGIT, are they going to interact? Can we have a trans interaction with TIGIT? The answer is no. So TIGIT cannot interact with the cell in trans. So remember, we have phenylamines jutting into a pocket, but this apparently is not tight enough to put them together. So clearly this is very selective, right? So now we have PDR on those cells. Do they interact? No, they don't. So again, despite having the similar pockets, but not identical, similar pockets and similar lock and key, they cannot interact with each other in trans. So now we have TIGIT on one cell, PDR on the other, so now we should see clustering, and we do. So I hope also in the back you now see really this big cell clusters here, like basically everything is together. And so the question is, of course, now, is it really this interface which is doing that? And we have a really nice antibody we know binds exactly, binds TIGIT right in this interaction phase. So we put the antibody in this assay, and what happens is the classes are completely resolved. So I hope I proved to you that it's really this trans interface which are making us as clusters, and that means we really have this heterophilic interaction going on we were hoping for. So just to prove to you that this is really important interaction and pretty tight, we make single point mutants in this lock and key interface and look for if they abrogated binding. And the way we do it is with a method which is called biolayer interferometry, or in the lab jargon we call this octet method. And you probably haven't heard of it method, but you probably have heard of Biocore. And Biocore is a very similar method where you immobilize your protein, so in this case also you immobilize a protein of choice on a chip or on a tip, and then like this is really very simple, you just immobilize. And then and there's no chemical reactions necessary for that. That's the nice part too. And then you flow over your protein, your ligand, or your chemical, or whatever you want to bind to it. And then you look at it. So it's binding. And then the type of graphs you get are this kind of graph. And the nice thing with this method is you also can get KBs and CR and K-offs. You get really nice kinetics from that with a very little amount of protein. And so this is a typical graph, and what you can see is this would be the on rate, and this is the off rate. And this is wild type PDR. So if you use wild type PDR and you touch it on the tip, then we get this kind of nice binding curve. And then if we make the mutants, either we destroy the lock or we destroy the key motif, right? If we collapse the lock or we take away the key or you make the key way too big, then our binding completely goes away. So this is basically, there's a little bit binding and these here no binding. So we know this side is fine. And then we did the same thing with TIGIT. So this is TIGIT wild type. Again, K on rate, K off rate. Nice binding. And then we make point mutants. Again, we either destroy the key or we destroy the lock. And there's still a bit binding here, but basically it all goes away. So with a single point mutant, we can completely abrogate binding of this complex. And so this is, of course, done in an in vitro study. You're purifying the proteins and so on. So the question is, what happens if they put that in a cell system and look at it now? So you put it in a cell, and then you ask the question, do we also destroy this in the cell? Because now we have transmembrane domain, we have everything. And so the way we do it is we express, for instance, PDR on the surface of cells, and then we bind TIGIT to it. And then what we do is we fax this and look for TIGIT binding. And so this is just a control, and I'm sorry this is a really bad figure. So this would be the isotype. So if there's no binding, remember if there's no binding and the fax is on the left, if you have nice binding or nice expression, it's going to be on the right. So the wild type is this, so it binds really nicely. And now we come into all our point mutants, exactly the same point mutants we just made in this octet assay. And what you can see is, and I really apologize for this, it's this little white line here. What you can see here, basically, we're destroying binding. So this one is still up here, but we're destroying binding for most of these point mutants. And the Y139. So when you make, this is a Y113, remember the tyrosine 113. So if you make this too big, if you put an arginine in, which is way bigger than the tyrosine, you destroy the binding. If you put now in an alanine, which is way smaller, basically what you're doing is you're jutting out key away, but the interaction surface is still intact, right? So you probably get way lower binding, but it can still bind, so this is how I explain this binding here still. And then you can do this again the other way around. You express TIGIT on the surface of cells, you bind PDR to it, and then you fax it, and again, you're basically losing binding. Again, this is this white here. Here is completely overlapping its isotype. So it goes completely away. So really also in the context of cells, this lock-in key motif is very, very important. And we can disrupt it by a single point mutant. It's gone. So the summary for this part is that the first ITB domains of TIGIT and PBR form a complex. The TIGIT interface consists of a double lock-in key motif because it's symmetrical. We have this twice, right? The lock-in key motif now explains and predicts the selectivity and specificity of the nectin. However, this structure still does not explain the zipper I was showing you at the beginning, and it also doesn't explain how we can signal these molecules, right? So, however, crystals always have a lot of surprises for you. So what I have shown you is that we have this structure, and I apologize, it's a little bit turned from what I showed you before, but to orient you, this is the tyrosine 113, and this is the phenylalanine 128 I just talked about. PBR is here, and TIGIT is here, so this is our lock and key interface. So I showed you that, which would be equivalent to this here. However, in the crystal, what we saw was this. So this looks way bigger, right? Looks like it's a tetramer. And so this would be equivalent to this. So the question is, do we have this, or do we have this? And is this tetramer physiologically or biologically irrelevant, or is it just a crystal packing artifact? I mean, that happens a lot of times. It's just a crystal packing, and it's just deceiving the crystallographer knots. Yeah, this happens all the time. You think, oh yeah, I found something really great, and unfortunately, no, it's just crystal packing. And so something is here already really, really deceptive, and that is that the two C termini, which will both go into the transmembrane domain, are right next to each other, so they could easily sit on the same cell. And the C termini of PBR here, they're also jutting out in the same direction to the back, where they could sit on the other cell type. So it's very, very convincing that this could be real, but we have to show that this is true and not a crystal artifact. So how do we do that? Well, one thing is that TIGIT in the structure forms a cis dimer. So it forms a dimer on the same side of the cell. And so if we look at this, we now take the PBR away. We have a dimer of TIGIT here in the middle. And so this is in the structure. This is how it looks in the structure. I turned on the structure again 90 degrees towards you to show you this interaction surface. And it's a very interesting interaction, and it's an anti-parallel leader sheet. And for the structure biologists under you, you know that if you have an anti-parallel leader sheet packing, you'll just have main chain interactions between those two leader sheets. So it can be a very strong interaction, and you have just main chain interactions zipping through the whole molecule. And this makes it very, very complicated to make actually point mutants, because if you make a mutant in the leader sheet, like the only one I think you can do, put a proline or something in, you will destroy the structure. However, the side chains, which will usually mutate, they will go up and down. So they don't even look at each other, because it's leader sheet, right? Up and down. So it's really, really hard to make point mutants to prove that that interface is actually real. So we're really lucky looking at it, and we found one residue we could actually mutate, which was in the interface, which was isoleucine 42, and because it's a symmetrical interface, we'll have two of those in the interface, right? So if you make a point mutant, what will happen is you will have it twice in the complex. So that should do the trick. If you mutate that, it should really disrupt it, should jut out there, and it jut into this direction and disrupt the interface. So the question is this dimer biologically relevant, and can we show it? So we had to do some tricks really to get this to work, because it's very hard biophysically to show that this dimer is actually real. And so we actually went in a system where we used a full-length protein and showed that on the surface of cells, this protein is able to form dimers. And the way we do this is with a technique which is called time-resolved FRET. And I walk you through that. It's a relatively complicated method. So in FRET, you have a donor molecule and you have an acceptor molecule. And the donor molecule will be excited at a certain wavelength. And then it will emit light, because it's fluorescent, at a different wavelength. And the acceptor also will be excited at a certain wavelength, and then emits light at a different wavelength. So now what you do in FRET is, you excite the donor, and then you read out the emission of the acceptor molecule. And why does that work? It's because the donor will emit at a wavelength where the acceptor will be excited. And if those molecules are close enough together, you'll have an energy transfer between those two molecules, and this will happen. So this needs to overlap. And then we basically, instead of reading out the donor wavelength, we are reading out now the acceptor wavelength. So this is what FRET looks like. And so practically how it looks like, we have one protein which is tagged with the donor, one protein which is tagged with the acceptor, and now those two come close enough together, either in solution or in the surface of cells or inside of cells, when people get this, so they're not touching each other or close enough, you get a FRET signal you can read out. And in our case, what we did was now, told you we're going to work on the surface of cells. So we have our TIGIT with the donor. We have a TIGIT with the acceptor on the surface of the cells. And if these two now come close enough together, we get a FRET signal. However, if you have two donors together, nothing will happen. If you have two acceptors together, nothing will happen. And so the type of graphs we get out of them, and they are highly processed data, looks like this. So it looks very messy, I know, but this is in vitro, in cell-based data. So you're reading out a lot of cells and a lot of times, and then it looks like this. And basically what you do is you very carefully plot the cell surface expression against the FRET intensity. And what you see here is this is the wild type. So you get a really nice line here. And the wild type has a very nice FRET signal, and we conclude that TIGIT makes oligomers on the cell surface. It won't let us conclude that we have dimers or cis dimers. It just lets us conclude we have oligomers on the same surface, which need to be in cis because right there on the cell surface, same cell. So now if you make the point mutants I just showed to you, the I42 mutants, so we have two mutants, then what you can see is that this FRET signal drops substantially. And remember, we had really these problems to making this mutant at all, so I'm not surprised that they're not dropping into zero, but they're dropping it substantially. So I hope I convinced you that on the surface of cells we get some kind of interaction. And so now the question is, I showed you the cell cluster formation before, which is dependent on the trans interaction of TIGIT and PBR. So the question is now, does this interaction, this oligomerization on the cell, does that in any way influence the trans interaction to the other cell? And this is, again, our clustering experiment. So we have our cell clusters. And so what you can see here is just a control. So we're just using CHO cells in this case with PBR, and there's no clustering, obviously. I mean, this is the control. If you have wild-type TIGIT and PBR, now you get, again, this huge clusters. I'm sorry, there's a lot of green cells here, but there's also red cells under it, so it's huge clusters together. And now what we do is we put now our point mutants I just showed to you, where we knock out the dimerization in TIGIT. We put in this assay and ask the question, does this abolish clustering, yes or no? And the answer is no, it does not. We have still nice clustering. We also quantified that by facts and can show it's not really abolishing it, either or point mutant. So what is it? Does it do anything? Is it just a dimer sitting out there, or does it have any influence on anything? So the question was, if it's not influencing cell clustering, which means cell adhesion in this case, does it influence cell-cell signaling? Because I told you that we want this huge cell zippers for signaling, right? And so if we had now TIGIT also be able to make oligomers or something, we would get really nice zippers, if you think about it. So is it important for signaling, yes or no? And so for that, apparently this experiment doesn't want to come up. For that now, we are looking at signaling in cells. And so what we do is we take dendritic cells. These are primary dendritic cells from black donations. And these naturally express PBR on the surface, as I've shown you before when I introduced this molecule to you. And so this is a control where we use a PBR antibody. And what the PBR antibody will do, it will just cluster. Right, if you have, the antibody has two arms, so it will cluster all these PBR molecules on the surface, and that should give us a really strong signal. And this is what it does too. We get then phosphorylation inside of the cell, and this is something we can read out. So we just do a pull down of PBR, and then we plot for phosphorylation, and this is what you see here. So the lower line is just complete PBR pulled down from these primary dendritic cells. And then what you can see here is a block for phosphotyrosine. So these are the ITIM domains which are now phosphorylated from a kinase by a kinase. And what you can see here is, this is just the isotype. If you now use an anti-PBR antibody, so you're cross-linking your PBR molecules on the surface, you're getting a really nice signal. This is, you're using anti-PBR antibody and then an anti-FC antibody, so you're cross-linking your cross-linker. So now you have really like the whole molecule is cross-linked all over the place. So you get a huge signal of phosphorylation now, right? And then you can do the same, and you can do a TIGIT FC molecule, but you basically replace those arms here. Instead you have an antibody, you just use now a TIGIT, basically. And of course we know a TIGIT binds very tightly to PBR, so you get the same kind of result. So again, you cross-link the whole thing, and you get a really nice phosphorylation signal. So instead of just putting an antibody or something in, you can also put cells in this assay. So now we have primary dendritic cells. We co-culture with another cell type which expresses now a TIGIT on the surface. And then you again do this readout and look for phosphorylation. And this is what you can see here. So this is just the cells. This is the cells expressing wild-type TIGIT. And so this is a signal we should compare to, and not this crazily cross-linked signal I just showed you before, because this is way more protein than you'll ever have on a real cell. So this is our signal. And now what we do is, now we use this construct, which I showed you before, where we knock out the cis dimerization site, the isoleucine 42, and ask, in this assay, what will happen? What you can see here is that you have an I42A and an I42D mutant. What you can see here is if you use the I42A, the signal is greatly reduced, and if you use the D mutant, basically nothing is left. So we are making a point mutant on the back of our complex, and we are not influencing the trans interaction. I showed you that, right? There's nothing happening there. But now we don't get signaling anymore. So how does that fit together? So the summary for this part is, the TIGIT PBR complex actually looks like a heterotetramer. TIGIT can form cis dimers in solution and on the surface of cells. The TIGIT PBR trans interface is necessary for cell-cell clustering, I've shown you that. But the TIGIT cis dimers are not necessary for the cell-cell clustering, and they do not inhibit it. But the TIGIT cis dimers are necessary for signaling. So, and TIGIT PBR forms cis-trans heterotetramers or oligomers on the surface of cells. So how can we now put this all together in a nice little model which is a little bit more digestible than all this data? So I'll try that. So this is the updated model now of the zipper formation. And now we are using, instead of these purple molecules, now we use our TIGIT PBR model, because now we have our heterophilic model. So again, we have cell 1 and cell 2. And what I haven't told you is that PBR on the surface of cells, you can see here the extracellular domain again, and now we're putting again all the domains in, all the 3 domains back. So what is known is that domain 2 here can actually interact with itself and form a sort of a cis dimer. So we're putting that in our model, so it looks probably like this. And this is not our work. And then what I have just shown you on this is the intracellular ITIM domain, which can signal inside the cell. What I have just shown you is that TIGIT on the surface of cells can form dimers or oligomers, which probably look like this, just going from the crystal structure. And then what we do is we just put our little crystal structure in. So what I've shown you in the crystal structure was this domain, this domain, this domain, and this domain. And now we're just adding this in our little model. So basically I have shown you this here. And now we put our knowledge in that we know that PBR also forms some sort of dimers over the second domain. Then it would look like this. And now if we're just adding another of our little crystal structures here, it would look like this, and then we add another PBR and another crystal structure, and so on and so on and so on. Does this remind you of something? The zippers? So, yeah, so this could go on ever and ever and ever and ever, okay? So So this could explain our zippering. And I also showed you that if we actually conform this here now, we get some kinase coming, and we actually know which kinase it is. It's a SORT kinase, which will now phosphorylate our clustered receptors inside the cell. And then this will attract phosphatases, and then those phosphatases will dephosphorylate other molecules. And then after some time, we get our IL-10 mate, and then we can attenuate the immune response in the very end. So this would be called a cis-trans zipper, or it's also called a receptor clustering. And that's a very common concept used in immunology, that you have receptor clustering, and then you have a signal transmitted by that. So with that, I would like to come to the outlook. So this is what I did at Genentech. And obviously there's a lot more to do. And what I've shown you is that we have two cells, either the same cell or different cells. And we have TIGIT and PVR interacting with each other, right? And then we have PVR is phosphorylated, and we get an inhibitory or attenuating signal. However, I told you that also TIGIT has a high-tin domain, and so far we haven't looked at that at all. So this would be one thing I would like to do and see what happens on the other cell type. On the other cell, is there any phosphorylation going on? Is this signaling? Do we have bidirectional signaling in this case? This would be very, very exciting to know. And also, is our clustering mechanism, is that helping the signaling, or can TIGIT signal all by itself? And then I just showed you that the nectin and the nectin-like family is pretty big. And PVR is interacting with quite a lot of those molecules, or these molecules are also interacting with each other. And so here I have PVR again, and these would be the nectins and the nectin-like molecules and these other molecules which are on the immune cell. And the question is now, do they interact the same way? I would predict so from my structure, but how about signaling? We do know that some of these molecules are not inhibiting, but they are activating. Or they have completely different signaling modules inside the cell. So not only do they have item domains, but they have like affinity domains and all kinds of things. So how is this signaling and clustering impacted now by PVR? So this would be the interaction, and then intracellularly what's happening is PVR, is this different signaling type it can do? Because we know again it's activating, so what's happening here is it direct or indirect? Again, inside here there are different modules here which can interact with each other. And then there are completely different, non-related immunoregulatory molecules. I depicted here in different shapes. And it's known that they also somehow, a lot of them have receptor clustering going on. The question is, do they have a similar mechanism going on, or is it completely different? Can we learn anything from our molecule here? Can we use this heterophilic approach I used here and look at those other molecules and see what's happening? And so they interact with each other. And what's happening downstream of those. And then, of course, there is an amazing amount of molecules inside the cell. There are kinases, there are other modules, there are interaction modules, lots of things. I haven't put all up because then you wouldn't be able to see anything. So how do these molecules interact with those? Because I told you that nectins are the first molecules which will start a cell adhesion junction. But then they are actually leaving that place, and other molecules come in, and it's thought that they recruit those other molecules to the cell adhesion junction, and we don't really know how that happens. So with that, sorry for that. And with that, I would like to thank people at Genentech, and they have made my 4 years there a fantastic time. So I'm in the protein engineering and structural biology department, and my